I'd like to call the meeting back to order. Hope everybody had a good lunch. We are going to be starting now on the last division and the largest division of the city, the police. I'm going to be doing a presentation, and then we'll be asking questions of the presentation and their budget after that. So I'd like to invite the chief and those who are going to be doing the presentation up to the mics.
I'm Andy Pringle, and the chair of the Police Services Board. First, let me start by saying I'm sorry we couldn't adjust to the 10:30 time this morning, but we'd had a long-standing meeting set up with Mr. McCormick and the association that the chief and I both had to attend. But thank you for the opportunity to present, for the board to present the board-approved 2018 budget request for the Toronto Police Service, the service's Parking Enforcement Unit, and the Toronto Police Services Board. With me today are Chief of Police Mark Saunders, Chief Administrative Officer Tony Veneziano, and the board's Executive Director Joanne Campbell. The budgets we're presenting have been developed in a dynamic period, as you're fully aware, where we're continuing to focus on transformation and organizational change right across the board. And I'd like to begin by providing you with some information about the legislative context in which we operate, and then briefly outline the budget process that we use to arrive at the figures we're presenting today. Section 39 of the Police Services Act requires that the board shall submit operating and capital estimates to the municipal council that show the amounts needed to maintain the police service and to pay the board's operating expenses. The role of the City Council is to establish an overall budget for the board upon reviewing these estimates. Our budget review process this year is founded on the essential principles of transparency and accessibility to the public. The Board Budget Committee, ably chaired by Councillor Shelley Carroll, met twice in public, first for a public budget information session, and a second time holding a meeting to review proposed budget and format recommendations to the board. In addition, detailed budget information was posted on the services and the board's websites for the public and other interested parties to see. I think it's fair to say this year we went much further than we've gone before in making those, as I said, transparent and available. And Councillor Carroll chaired an excellent public meeting several months ago on the whole process. And I'm pleased to say that the result is the Toronto Police Service, the Parking Enforcement Unit, and the Toronto Police Services Board have all met the city target of a 0% increase. As you know, in January of last year, the Joint Board and Service Transformational Task Force, the TTF, released its final report entitled Action Plan, The Way Forward. The report goes beyond anything and any other review that the Toronto Police Service has done. It was based on the insights and dedication of service members, civic leaders, and in many ways all of the reports that have gone before, as well as conversations extensively with stakeholders. And as you know, we did in the summer of last year, a broad consultation across the city. And it provided a variety of opportunities for sustained savings and presented a modern vision of policing in this city. It outlined a plan to modernize the Toronto Police Service with an approach that we cannot meet and grow the policing needs without or with the old policing model. And so we need this new vision of a modern, effective police service that makes the best use of existing resources while leveraging technology, information, and working with our communities. I'm pleased to say that today we're on track to achieve changes recommended in the way forward. We're determined to succeed and to provide trusted and efficient service when and where the public needs us, responding to the complex needs of our community and particularly working with the community. However, as you know, in order to succeed, we need to continue to partner with the city, and we need the city's continued support. For example, in facilitating the school crossing guard transition and assuming the new broader city role in dealing with non-police emergency calls through 311 and diverting other non-police calls such as noise complaints to city divisions. I believe the budgets that we present to you today for approval clearly demonstrate that the board and the service are very much cognizant of the fiscal reality of the city and the role that the police must play within it. At the same time, it is incumbent upon the board to establish a budget that ensures that the city is provided with adequate and effective policing services. I believe that the budget we are presenting to you accomplishes these significant objectives. So at this time, I'd like to introduce and ask the Services Chief Administrative Officer, Tony Veneziano, to speak about the services budget, following which Ms. Campbell, the Executive Director of the Police Services Board, will discuss the board's budget. And then after that, we're happy to answer any questions. Tony?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Budget Chair, and members of the Budget Committee. I'm going to start by presenting the 2018 operating budget request for the Toronto Police Service. And so we start with fundamentals around our mission, which is basically to keep and provide public safety services to the City of Toronto to keep it the safest and best place to be. And we do that, and we're guided by the Police Services Act that requires us to provide services around crime enforcement, or crime prevention, law enforcement, assistance to victims, public order maintenance, and emergency response services. Andy talked about the Way Forward report, and that is basically our strategic plan that basically drives and guides how we will modernize the services that we provide to the residents and visitors to the City of Toronto. Our principles are based on active accountability, being trusted, transparent and engaged, being inclusive and collaborative, but also being affordable and sustainable. And so the Way Forward report is basically guiding and driving us and being where the public needs us the most, embracing partnerships with the communities that are so important to delivering public safety services, and focusing on the needs of a large city, needs that are becoming more and more complex as the city grows and becomes more important. Following the plan, we looked at our organizational chart, and I just want to point out two quick things here. We've now, through that organization, the chief wanted to focus on our people. Our people are our greatest asset, and so we've set up a new human resource command that specifically focuses on ensuring that we have the right people in the right jobs and that we're hiring the right people with the competencies that we need to provide the services to the city. The other thing that's happened is that our community response, what used to be Community Safety Command, is now split into two, one being community and neighborhood, which again focuses on the community and the partnerships that we need to develop there, and priority response, which is response to calls for service. This slide shows a history, and you'll see that in 2010 we were at 5,618 in terms of our approved establishment, and at that time we were actually hiring. So you see the straight line there is our approved position establishment. So we were hiring to that number in 2010, and as you can see through the years, through civilianization, in 2015 we actually civilianized, so we went down on that approved establishment and went up the same amount on the civilian side. So now we're at 5448 in terms of an approved establishment, but you'll see that in 2018 we'll be down to 4870 actual bodies on the street, and that assumes that we're going to lose about 160 officers. And our hiring will be about 80 in 2018. So we're down by the end of 2020, we'll be down about 700 uniform officers. This actually shows our strategic deployment. Like I said, it assumes 160 people are going to be retiring or leaving and separating from the service every year. And it shows our deployment or our strategic hiring plan for the next 3 years, 18, 19, and 20. And what it shows is that by the end of 19, we'll be down to 4,750, which was the number that we've committed to. And then in 2020, through hiring, we will maintain that number at around 4,750 as well. On the civilian side, it's a similar story in the sense that our approved establishment is 2,230, but we are well below, about 250 positions below that approved establishment, which is about an 11% vacancy rate. This shows our vacancy, and you can see we're about 10.4%. It's actually a little bit more than that because, on the civilian side anyways, because we have part-timers, we're actually running at around 11.5% in terms of a vacancy rate. Our hiring moratorium covered all positions right across the service except for communication operators. And the other message I just want to deliver here is that we've been through the hiring moratorium. We now need to switch to the investment side, strategic investments that will actually enable us to provide adequate support to the task force and modern and effective public safety services to the city. In terms of key accomplishments, we talked about our hiring and promotion moratorium. That basically allowed us to right-size the organization. It allowed us to change processes that we're still doing today in terms of creating efficiencies so that in fact we do business differently and better and therefore are able to do it with fewer people and with an investment in technology that gives them the information and the tools to actually do that job much more effectively. We did return 2 facilities to the city as a result of consolidating some of our operations, and those facilities were worth about $4.5 million, but we also shaved $250,000 off our bottom line in terms of ongoing support savings. We disbanded TAVIS and the Transit Patrol Unit, and like I said before, this allowed us to redeploy those officers, 80 in each, to the front line so that we continue to provide services to meet demand. We are looking at moving to a district model. We're actually looking at moving to a district model right across the organization. And we're still in the process of now finalizing the actual number of districts. And so a district will have a major hub as well as neighborhood divisions. In some of the downtown locations like 51, 52, a district will be a division, so they will stay because of their size and where they're located. The other thing that we've done is our criminal investigation bureaus, we're consolidating those into a district, so we're needing fewer people in that area. That then allows us to redeploy those people to the front line. We've embarked on a major modernization of our HR. We basically said, if we're going to bring in the best and the brightest and people with the right competencies, then we have to have an HR organization that can actually effectively support and allow us to achieve those goals. And so the board has approved a reorganization and an investment to enable us to do that. We're also recognizing, like other organizations, that mobility in terms of providing services is critical to any organization. And so we want to start putting mobile devices in the hands of our officers so that they can actually provide and get information, whether they're on foot, whether they're on a bike, whether they're in a car, whether they're on a motorcycle. They'll have that ability, and we're piloting that in 2018 with the hope that we can roll it out in future years. In terms of major crime indicators, crime was actually down right across probably North America in the first, probably from 2005 right to 2015. And then we started seeing a slight increase. And so in 2017 compared to 2016, major crime is up about 4%. Homicide is down about 15%, but I can tell you that it shows 53 there as of October 31st. We're now up to 61, so we're basically flat in terms of a comparison to prior year. Shootings are down in 2017 compared to 2016, but you'll see that they're actually still up from 2015, so that's still an issue across the city. In terms of emergency, non-emergency calls, on the emergency side, we're actually up about 2%. On the non-emergency side, we're basically flat. Our operating variance right now, we're projecting a $9 million variance at year end, which is about a 99% spend rate. And most of that is due to the hiring moratorium, the fact that we're not replacing people that leave. But like I said, we're going to have to start making some investments in that area as we move forward. Some of the issues, anyone that goes through change, any organization that goes through modernization and transformation, you're dealing with people, and so there's a transition and change management that has to occur during that, and we're very busy trying to support our people as we move through this change. The other thing that's changed is crime. A lot of the crime that happens now you don't see. A lot of the work that we do to prevent crime, the public doesn't see. So the evolution to cybercrime and national security issues that we work with our federal and international partners are things that the public might not see, but is very real work that happens each and every day. In terms of cost escalations, we still have the collective agreement settlement in 2018. That's the last year of our contract. Some of the provisions impact our costs, whether they be legal and dam, medical and dental benefits, retention pay. We've built in economic factors that the city has provided in terms of other increases. We have transformational related costs that we also have to provide for so that we can make those important investments. Premium pay, in 2018, we actually predict that we're going to be overspent on premium pay by about $5 million. So certainly that is a pressure that we have to deal with in 2018. But you can imagine that we're trying to deal with this pressure with reduced staffing, but also an increase in special events and other events that are occurring across the city that require the police and our partners to be there to make sure that the public is safe. And civilianization, as we move and say we don't need a police officer to do this type of work, we want to hire a civilian to do that at less cost. Because we are going down in terms of our uniform establishment, it actually costs us money, but it will cost you less to do that activity. So here was basically we want to improve how we relate to the public. We want to enhance the services that we deliver. We want to change and enhance the access to the services, so more online reporting, and perhaps having police officers, instead of police officers taking and responding to calls, actually have civilians doing that same work where it makes sense. In the back of our minds, as we do all this, and we've now achieved 0% for the second year in a row, we want to do this in an affordable and sustainable way. And we want to do it recognizing that our culture has to change in order for us to move forward on this important initiative. So I talked about some of these things. Andy talked about the lifeguard and school crossing guards. The lifeguard is actually going to happen for the May spring season. The school crossing guards will happen the following year. And we're actually working with transportation to try to reduce the number of police officers that actually have to sit at a crossing guard location when somebody doesn't show up. So hopefully we can do that without using police officers to do it. I talked about the restructuring of our HR. That's an ongoing initiative. We're also, the city, through Josie's Levita's group, we're doing a feasibility analysis to look at alternative service delivery and whether that's even a feasible option or viable option for both courts and parking. And that is very independent, arm's length from us, and the city is leading that. And like I talked about before, we're moving to frontline mobility for our officers. Our actual gross budget is about $1.14 million or $1.4 billion. Most of that comes from the property tax component. We also get provincial grants. We have user fees. We recover paid duty in terms of both, because that flows through us. That also is impacted there. And then we have reserve funds that we also use to provide services with. Our budget breakdown, you can see as usual, about 88% of it is for salary, benefits, and premium pay, and about another 12% is for non-salaried related dollars. And what that budget buys, and we're actually in the process of also modernizing this in terms of the various programs. Law enforcement, 71%, which includes the investigative part of, it's not just responding to calls. Community prevention initiatives and programs, 9%, infrastructure, and administration, which is about 4% of our budget. As Andy mentioned, for the second year in a row, we are coming in at zero. Our net budget is $996.4 million, just under $1 billion. And the reason that's, you'll remember a number of $1.005 billion is because we have moved the school crossing guards, and we're accounting for that, so that while we may be lower than $1 billion, some costs have moved to the city side. The net effect is zero. In terms of significant pressure, like 17.4 for salary settlement, and we've been deferring making incremental contributions to our reserve, which in my view is not a good financial strategy. So we're actually trying to make those contributions and have included them in our budget this year. I think I've covered most of these. This is basically a chart that shows the basic cost drivers, and certainly if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer that slide. We talked about key points around 88% of our budget. The rest is over the last few years, and I think this applies not only to the police, but probably city divisions and programs, where we've cut a lot of the what we call non-salary, discretionary type expenses as best we can, and we're basically very close to the bone. So where we can make an impact is on where the bulk of our budget is, and that's on the people side, and that's what we're trying to do but do it in a way that we give them the tools with fewer people to actually and change the way we do business so that the change to the public is not at all noticeable and in fact enhanced. It's always wise to look at beyond 18, and so if you look at our outlook, we're assuming, because we don't have a collective agreement for 19 and 20, we're assuming a salary settlement in and around the rate of inflation, let's say 2%. And so right now we're projecting an increase of 3.1% in 19 and 2.6% in 20. So that's the operating. On the capital side, this just shows we've got about $291 million in assets that range from speed, radar equipment, firearms, vehicles. What it doesn't include is our facilities, which are city-owned. So here we're looking at just optimizing our facilities footprint and basically enhancing services by enhancing technology. So our objective, like any organization, again, if you look at the Bay, you look at a lot of organizations, space is very, very critical and it's very expensive. And so as organizations move to a more mobile footprint for shopping or whatever, we're basically doing the same. We don't need as many divisions that we currently have. We want to consolidate those divisions. It will save us money, not only short-term but long-term. It will allow us to return key assets to the city that the city can then use strategically as they see fit. So this is a win-win, I think, for everybody, and it doesn't impact. We don't dispatch from a division. Our officers are on the street. So basically, we're moving very, very aggressively on that. So we're looking at facilities realignment. The other key priority actions is that we've got a request into our board around conducted energy weapons, and so we'll hopefully get an answer on that soon. And then the connected officers is another issue that we're dealing with. So in terms of key accomplishments, we renovated our 52 division. We actually worked very closely with the city on that. They actually gave us some money that allowed us to do some of the work that they were going to do. So certainly we created some efficiencies. That project came in on budget. We, as I said, returned 2 facilities to the city. We talked about the Connected Officer Program. That basically is going to put 700 devices in our officers' hands in 2018. We're not using city money for that. We're actually using a provincial grant to actually achieve that. With the great help of city real estate and city planning, we've now actually shortlisted 3 sites for a consolidated 54 and 55 division, and the preferred site is scheduled to go to executive committee in January. The other thing that we're doing that, again, people on the outside won't see is electronic document management. This is the actual moving to a digital environment where we can actually do workflow electronically. It saves filing paper, it saves moving paper around, and it saves us money. We're also moving on a cradle-to-grave payroll HR system. We've already done quite a bit of work around streamlining and automating the administrative process for training and actual supervisory approval of that training. We're working, and we just got award of the contract for radio replacement. And this contract, again, was done with the city divisions in mind as well. So our contract is now available to City Works, EMS, Fire, and they get the same pricing that we do in terms of volume discounts. So it's a win-win, again, and a good example of shared procurement. Our capital variance, we are not spending where we'd like to be. A lot of that is because we don't want to just spend for the sake of spending. We want to make sure that we spend the money correctly. Some staffing shortages have also impacted our ability to move forward on certain things. But we are moving forward and basically are confident that in future years we'll start, our spending rate should increase. Reserve funding, certainly from where I sit, we're finally taking some action to deal with that issue on a more sustained, longer-term basis by actually making some needed contributions. But as we move into more technology means more equipment, which means more pressure on the reserve funding in terms of contributions. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. Facility realignment, I've talked about, and we're certainly moving forward very aggressively on that. Connected officers, I've talked about. That is not in our capital program, but we envision it strategically, probably in our program starting in 19. Body-worn cameras, we did a pilot. They were well supported by both the public and our officers. It does, like connected officer, involve significant total cost of ownership, both capital, one time, and ongoing in terms of operating costs. So we're going to look at this and connected officer from a total value benefit perspective, and then looking at the overall cost from a one-time and ongoing perspective as well, and then relative to other projects that we have in the pipeline. This slide basically shows that on average we're on target to meet our capital targets that the city established for us. In terms of where our money goes, most of it goes to facilities and information technology. Our goal is actually where you see more 42%, on facilities and then 33% on technology. We actually want to flip that at some point, where we're spending more on technology and less on bricks and mortar. And that's part of our overall long-term strategy. Where the money comes from, it's basically divided between the reserve, equally, reserve and debt, and then there's a little bit in terms of development charges that we also have access to in terms of some of our projects. You'll see that 67% of our capital program is for state of good repair, but because we are moving with a lot of transformation initiatives, the other third is for service improvements around BI technologies, TPS archiving, facilities realignment. Our backlog is going down, and if we reduce the number of facilities, it will continue to go down because we'll have fewer facilities to actually keep in a state of good repair. So that's something that we're very in tune to. This just shows it by funding source. It's the same chart as the other one, just in a different format. One thing that we in the city finance people are very cognizant on as we move forward on capital projects, you can't just look at the cost of the project itself and the debt that it might attract or require, or the reserve fund that we need to actually pay for it. You've got to look at the ongoing costs. A lot of these things, as we invest in technology, require that technology be replaced, require that technology be supported and maintained. And so there's pressures that come there. So certainly from a decision maker perspective, we want to make sure that both our board, the chief, and this committee here and City Council are aware of the total costs when you make these types of decisions. The unfunded capital projects are basically two, and I talked about them: connected officer and body-worn camera. We really want to move very carefully on both, but especially body-worn camera, because it is significant in terms of the costs. Others have jumped into this and now are regretting it. So if we do go and this moves forward, certainly we want to make sure that we do it the right way. And I'll very quickly go through parking enforcement. So our job on parking enforcement is basically to ensure and help and work with transportation to assist with the safe and orderly flow of traffic. We basically do that by enforcing bylaws that have been enacted by the city and basically try to change behavior by ensuring compliance or supporting compliance. Our parking enforcement officers do more than that because they work with us. They are in another budget. They help us with stolen vehicle recoveries. They basically are another set of eyes on the street that can help our police officers actually do their job more effectively. We're part of the parking tag operations. We're one component of it. We, along with the city treasurer, city court services, and city legal, are all part of one big program that's viewed as a program. So parking enforcement is not part of the service budget. The revenues, we don't get any of the monies that are collected, but our revenues, and I'll say our enforcement, is impacted by city council initiatives, bylaw changes, increased fines in terms of how the public behavior changes as a result of those increased fines, specialized programs, and then how we do enforcement and where we do enforcement. Parking enforcement is also, it's a $47 million budget, $1,045 on a net basis, and it also came in at a 0% increase over last year. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Joanne Campbell to provide us with a quick presentation on the board's budget.
Advance my slides?
What's that?
Do you want to advance my slides?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Tony. The Toronto Police Services Board is a 7-member body appointed and mandated under the Police Services Act to provide, through civilian governance, adequate and effective police service in Toronto, in accordance with the provisions of the Act. The board has 6 full-time staff members who are not members of the Toronto Police Service. They are independently employed by the board and are excluded from membership in either the Toronto Police Association or the Senior Officers Organization. Our vacancy analysis, we are not reporting of vacancies at this time. We have 6 full-time employees, and the 7th individual noted on this chart is the chair, who is remunerated in a full-time fashion. In terms of our 2017 key service accomplishments, the board, in collaboration with the Chief of Police, introduced and approved the final report of the Transformational Task Force, The Way Forward. For its part, the board has retained an organizational change management consultant to provide the board with independent advice with respect to the progress of implementation of The Way Forward. The board recruited and appointed 3 new deputy chiefs of police. The board approved a new procedural bylaw governing its operations. The board also received the first reports from the chief with respect to the regulated interactions policy, and the board appointed a regulated interactions review panel, 2 community members and the chair of the board, who review the chief's report and review the Toronto Police Services treatment of historic street check data. The board will consider the Toronto Police Services' first ever mental health strategy, not in fact in 2017, but we anticipate in early 2018. And finally, in 2017, the board approved its response to the coroner's inquest into the death of Andrew Loku, and approved the 3 recommendations that had been directed to the board. In terms of our 2017 operating budget variance, we're projecting a negligible variance, mainly due to the fact that we did have 1 vacant position for a short time earlier this year. Key challenges and issues for 2018. As you may be aware, revisions to the Police Services Act were introduced by the province late this year. We are currently assessing those for cost and service delivery implications. As Tony mentioned in his presentation, the collective agreements with the Toronto Police Association and the Senior Officers Organization expire December 31st, 2018. The board will be in a bargaining position at the end of 2018. The board will continue to actively monitor implementation of the recommendations of The Way Forward, seeking advice from its change management consultant. As mentioned, the board will begin the actual implementation of the recommendations directed to it by the coroner's inquest into the death of Andrew Loku. And the board will continue to fund from its budget the Toronto Police Services Gender Diversity and Trans Inclusion Project. In terms of our 2018 operating budget, you'll notice our budget is roughly divided into thirds. A third is related to labor relations legal costs and the chargeback from the city for the services of city legal. Another third for salaries and benefits, and a final third, which is non-salary expenditures and reserve contributions. Our 2018 operating budget achieves the city's 0% target. It's $2.3 million request. The 2019 and 2020 outlooks assume salary settlements that will occur at the rate of inflation. And the other costs that, I'll go to the next slide on the outlooks. The unknown cost is the potential impact of the Safer Ontario Act, which, as I mentioned, is still being assessed. And that concludes the Police Services Board presentation.
Mr. Chair, we're prepared now to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll begin with questions. Councillor Carroll.
It's a preemptive question. I'm asking the question about complement because I know it will come up when we get to council. There's the snapshot complement that we actually have today, but the recommendations, some councillors will just zip through the budget reading the recommendations, and we're recommending that the approved complement be 5,440, and the staff complement be 2,000. I can't remember the number, but in both cases, it's significantly higher than the actual today. Why do we approve that higher number as our approved complement? Just to remind folks for the deliberation.
Actually, we're not, but it's a very good question. I think at some point we do need to adjust that.
Yeah.
Both from a board approved, and usually we do that. We used to do it as part of the budget presentation. We've also done it when we go to the board with our organizational chart in February of next year and basically get approval. The reality is, though, that we budget at actual bodies on the street or in a chair. But you're right, Councillor, that's something that we do have to adjust and something that we're going to be working with the chief and the board on.
But even then, you wouldn't, for instance, it hasn't been adjusted for a while, but you wouldn't go all the way down to what is the snapshot today. You would still want to be able to respond to a sudden uptick in any kind of behavior. So it's what's approved and what our budget has us have on staff. It's never going to be exactly the same, am I right?
That's correct, and I think that's a discussion again that we would have certainly with the chief and the chair and the board in terms of where and how low that number can actually go.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mahevik.
Well, just following up on that, so what is the approved complement in 2017?
Okay, so we've got two numbers. We'll talk about the actual approved establishment, which is approved positions. On the uniform side is 5448. And basically, we're going to be on average at, in 2018, 4870. 4870 means that we're assuming 160 people will leave and that we hire about 80 people to replace them in 2008.
So it hasn't, in all of this restructuring, and my recollection was that 2010, and I know we've debated this before, or may have, my recollection is right, the number was, I remember 5250.
It was 5250.
When was
but not in 2000. It was probably in 2006 or 5 and 6, and then we had the, which grant? The community safety grant?
From the provincial monies, right?
And that added 250 positions that they would partially fund.
Right, so the number
we increased
was
it to 5510.
5510, so the number was 5250, and then by virtue of a provincial grant that came and went, but you're assuming the higher number, not the lower money, because that was provincial money. Usually in the departments, if someone else funds it and then they take away the funds, it's 5250.
But remember, they did not fund the position in totality. I think on one they funded 30,000, and on the second one it was 35,000. So we still had those positions. Basically, we were picking up the full cost. Now they only ended those grants. When was it that they? Last year? 2 years ago. So at that point, and that's why I think we're in a position.
They left us holding the bag essentially on those.
Yeah.
The cost there.
If we wanted to stay at that number, we've basically, the establishment stayed the same, but the actual people that we actually have has gone down, and that's what we budget to.
Right, okay, so is that a studied number, 5448 then? Or like, where does that number come from? And is there a process to say, okay, you know what, with all the technological changes, change in practice, governance reviews and so on, we think that we as all things being equal, and they never are, crime goes up, crime goes down, will you be coming to the board, and I guess eventually council, with a report saying, you know what, after we've done this transformational review, this is the studied number that we think we can drive, we can carry on with for upcoming years?
think right now, and the chief can certainly chime in on this as well, right now our number is 4750. Now, having said that, we're not going to get there until the end of I think next year, or the end of next year, 2019. Now, stuff may happen in between, but certainly the chief can answer that question. But right now, what we're budgeting towards and what our strategic plan is 4750.
Right, okay. Okay, the crossing guards and lifeguards, excuse me. Oh, my apologies, sorry. Nice to see you, Chief.
Thank you. Yeah, so there is still a lot of work to be done, Councillor. We, for the first time in, I think, policing history, through technology, we're able to actually use data, use analytics to really look at what that number should be. What do we do on a day-to-day basis? What are the patterns and trends that are associated with our particular industry? What things are we doing that we should not be doing? So there are a lot of, as you stated, a lot of moving parts that will allow us to have that determination. But the one thing that we will be able to provide at the end of the day is a more concrete number as to how many uniform officers within our industry we're going to require and how many other members from the civilian side of policing will be able to determine a more definitive number and be able to validate it through analytics.
Right, that's great. Thank you very much. So are the lifeguards and the crossing guards, are they in your budget now, today?
Josie, you might want to explain this one.
So through you, Mr. Chair, on the lifeguards, at the last council meeting or 2 meetings ago, we actually transferred the funds from the police services operating budget to Parks, Forestry and Recreation. So that budget is actually sitting there, and they are planning the work to actually begin delivery of that service for this spring. In terms of the crossing guard,
Everyone's being held whole, so these folks have, I don't know what that budget for those two categories were, X. That X amount has shifted over to transportation.
so in terms of Parks, Forestry and Recreation, that amount shifted over to recreation staff. You will see a net new amount that's being requested in the unfunded list for PF&R because we have a different cost structure than the police service had, so there's a little incremental cost to the city as a result of that cost structure. So that's
Why is it listed in PF&R as a net new?
it's a new service for the city of Toronto. So that's the
It's really a transfer from, frankly, one department to another department.
different service delivery.
Okay.
Okay. In terms.
Okay, my last question is, well, I have two more questions. I can go back if you want to share the floor.
Get them done quickly.
Okay, one is premium pay, especially around the policing of parking. It seems like what would a condition be where someone would get premium pay for parking enforcement? They seem to be everywhere all the time. I got one yesterday.
Thank you for that.
I'm glad to contribute to your coffers. Not your coffers, her coffers, I guess, yes. But I don't understand the overtime. Like, what condition would there be for overtime?
I'll try. Macford, do you want to? Part of it is just covering overtime, because if we had them go, or sort of for courts, to go to courts, because if we had them go during their on duty, basically it would take them away from actually doing the enforcement. But I'll let Macford try to give you a better answer just in terms of.
So all the parking folks who go to court, when they're in court, they're on overtime.
Yes, sir. Most of them will go on overtime, but there are also, we have G platoon Monday to Friday, they will go on duty, but then we have to use premium pay to backfill their spots. So the spots are not filled vacant. So
Is there not a way to rationalize that so that where it's one thing to pay time, it's another thing to pay time and a half? And if this has been a persistent issue like for forever.
Councillor, we're getting into.
Okay.
You're at 7.5 minutes. So why don't I let you're going to have to hold the last question. This is, and well, if you want to come back, we can come back.
Okay.
Well, we have 3 departments.
I understand that, but we're just sort of trying to be fair with everybody. Councillor Campbell's next.
And then you Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I would just like to say good job on the budget coming in at 0%, and I'll echo Councillor Havik's comments. Good to see you, Chief Saunders. If you live in a part of the city where there's very little crime, the only thing you care about with the police is in regard to traffic. And can you talk a little bit about efforts to control traffic, to curb, speeders, moving violations, trends, and so on?
Yeah, I would love to. Unfortunately, that's all it has been, is talk. I think gone are the days where people are more interested in efficiency and effectiveness of having roads being obeyed and being safe. We've got 5,600 kilometers of road. My numbers of uniform officers are shrinking, so the police demand is a factor that I think we need to start changing the narrative. There is technology that is out there that can be of tremendous value. If you look around the studies around the world, which says over and over again, utilizing technology, not just for moving violations, but also for parking, is a tremendous compliance for people. If people see a law and also know that there's enforcement, they are more likely to comply than having to look around their shoulder to see if they've got one of my big bulky cars or my officers with radar guns, and then slowing down and behaving momentarily. So the technology piece, I think, is something that we would like to work with the city on to help keep our streets safer, and I think that this is an opportunity and a time in which we can do that. In the meantime, one of the things that we have done is using the existing analytics. We're able to see where those hot spots are across the city. We have enhanced our deployment from a strategic perspective. So with our limited resources, we are putting officers in those places that the data is showing us, the when and where and why. And we're getting results in reduction in those particular areas.
Okay, so if we've got, let's say we've got 4,900 officers, uniformed officers, just as a round number, how many of those are on duty on any given day in a 24-hour span?
I think you're looking, I'm thinking about 200, 250, give or take.
No, are on duty across the city. In all.
Let me phrase that differently. When we talk about police, I think most people are thinking a uniformed person in a uniformed car going from call to call. I have hundreds of specialized officers that are out, whether it be drug enforcement, whether it be gun and gang,
right,
and all those other units. So on a regular basis, we will have hundreds that are there that can be deployed at any given time, depending on the critical situation. But for the standard primary response unit, it's a couple of hundred at any given time throughout a daily span.
Now, I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, you've set up a counterterrorism unit that operates on a citywide basis?
Well, we have resources that look after national security. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Now, in the budget, in the numbers of the budget, there was an increase of $5 million from the provincial subsidy. What was that? We're
still getting, this is the last year, 18 will be the last year of the provincial court upload.
Right.
So we're getting about $5 to $6 million for that.
Okay, and I noticed, and then that's it. And then what? Yeah, okay, then you have to find more. So in regard to the budget, you came in at zero. That $5 million certainly helped. You won't have that next year. Where else is there much more wiggle room in the police budget?
Not really. Certainly, we're doing our best to do at least the same with less. You can see our numbers in terms of, we're down 700 officers and probably another 200 civilians. So we're trying to actually create a much more sustainable fiscal model without impacting service, and in fact, hopefully improving service. But in terms of finding additional dollars, that's why you see our outlook. We actually see, this is the second year we've come in at zero. At some point, we're going to have to start covering some and making some of the investments that we have to make.
What does the Toronto Police spend on travel in a year?
Very, very little. I can get you the number.
And I just want to answer to that question, that same question, and be a little bit more direct, sir. One of the things we're finding through our research is there are a tremendous amount of things that we as an agency are doing that we should not be doing. And so looking at the alternative measures is something that's critical as well as we move forward. And the use of technology is going to be something that is going to be tremendously important as well. So there are a lot of things, for example, theft of liquor, theft of gas. We do thousands of these types of calls that take an inordinate amount of time to do from an administrative process. We don't need to send a two-car police officer to do that. We're doing that right now because it's a matter of public education. It's a matter of getting the city comfortable with the change of things that we are not going to be going to. But when we say we're not going to it, it doesn't mean we're going to compromise on the safety in any way, shape, or form. It's about being more practical with the resources that we have. So those numbers, as they shrink, it's because we are focusing more on the things that we should be doing and also trying to expose the things that we shouldn't be doing and then trying to pass them on to those that should be doing that.
Just one last question, Mr. Chair. There was an increase in service and rent of over $3 million. What's that figure?
The travel is, for business travel, is $250,000 that we spend.
$250,000.
Yes. And that includes moving, transporting prisoners to other cities or picking them up, that sort of business.
So the $3 million increase in service and rent, what is that?
Trying to get that answer for you right now.
Okay, because I mean, it's a major, you've got salaries, materials, equipment, service and rent. I'm just wondering, what's in there?
So a good chunk of that is our utilities bill at our police college. It's about $1 million increase because of an error that the Hydro made way back when. So they finally caught it. They've now billed us.
Is there not a statute of limitations on the error?
2 years. You're absolutely right. 2 years. Okay. And so it actually has created about $1 million pressure for us in 2018.
Okay, Councillor, we'll have to wrap it up there. We'll have to do some other questions. Come back if you want. Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you, and welcome back, Chief. Okay, I have a few questions. So, when are the recommendations from the Transformation Task Force expected to be fully implemented?
Different recommendations have different timelines, Councillor. I can tell you the things that we as an organization are in full control of. We have the opportunity of having more definitive timelines, but certain things have been done already. So, for example, the disbanding of tablets, that was done. When we look at the connected officer, we're moving ahead with that. Next year, we're looking at deploying 700 more. We started out with a pilot project of 35. So these things we have more control over, but when we get into the big ticket items, as my CEO spoke about amalgamations and things along those lines, as you would be more familiar than I, to really get that going, it's going to take a multitude of years to really implement. Yes, it will.
Okay, all right. So just with the decision to take the officers out of the schools, which were just, that decision was just made recently by the board, the school board and the police board. Where will these officers be deployed?
Yeah, those officers were already deployed in different areas of the service. When the initial decision to make was made to suspend, I did not move those officers into the Catholic School Board. In fact, I kept the Catholic School Board numbers the same. I did not increase them in any way, shape, or form to wait for the outcome of the District School Board. And so we redeployed those officers, I believe some in the community, some in the front line. And I mean, that door is not closed yet. We still have a very active relationship with Toronto District School Board, and we've got lots of talking to do.
How many officers were there in this school?
The whole program, I believe, had 75 officers, and now I think we are at, I think it is 34. I was thinking 20 to 34, but it's 34 are deployed in the Catholic School Board.
So they can be put back, they can be put out in the community then?
The 34, yes, technically they could. Yeah.
All right, and within the community where the schools were located?
That's not an impossibility. I'm not sure that would necessarily be a decision that I'd make.
Okay, so that's yet to come, right? the decision on that one?
No, my decision is to keep them in the Catholic School Board until I'm told not to. The relationship and the benefits have been tremendous, and I think that there are a lot of positive stories, but more important, when we talk about value, when we talk about having an agency that is trying to be community-centric, and our school environment is a portion of the community, and the relationships that have been developed within the schools have been tremendous. But there's a lot of room for improvement, and we're actively listening and looking at ways in which we can make those adjustments to improve and enhance the experience.
Yeah, no, I understand the Catholic board, but the public board made the decision not to, right?
Yes.
So what are the total number of officers in the public board that will be
30,
redeployed?
that would be 30-something.
And they will be put out in the community, those ones?
They were, yeah, those officers were deployed in months ago.
Okay, all right. So with the reduced number of uniformed officers, has there been an increase in requests for callbacks from local divisions?
I would have to look to see if that has been made by the public. The association has made the request for callbacks, and we are entering discussions with them. We have set the parameters for callbacks, and if the requirements are made based on the requirements, then we'll issue those callbacks.
So if I ask for a briefing note on that, you'll be able to give it to me at a later date?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Kate, so we get a lot of calls, and other members of council mentioned it, for enforcement as far as cars not, speeding, not stopping at stop signs, rolling stop signs and all that. We get so many calls like that. So rather than send out our resources on those calls, which we do get a lot of, and the officer should be on the street, making the street safer. Have you given any thought in asking the province to give some funding as far as putting cameras at the stop signs and for enforcement?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, the camera initiatives are the city's responsibility, not ours. We are there.
No, but there needs to be a request, right, to the province for that. And will it not go through the police services? No? It's all city?
No, I mean, what I was told was that the city had to request to the province in order for that particular type of initiative. That was my understanding.
So nothing to do with the police services?
So like red light cameras are currently run and operated by the city.
Yeah.
My understanding, as the chief indicated, was if we want to extend that to other, like prohibited turns or speeding or whatever, that would require some discussion with the province in terms of our ability, the city's ability to do that. We would obviously work with city, probably transportation, to provide information on where they might deploy those cameras.
So in fact, then that would reduce, if we were to get those cameras and request the province to fund them, that would reduce the number of calls that the police get, and those officers could be patrolling, right?
Absolutely.
Right, so which is a good thing. So that's something I think that we should be looking at. Andy?
Councillor Manziata, yeah, I think it's been alluded to several times before. Councillor Campbell saying the same thing. 90% of our budget is our people, and the city continues to grow. The pressures are going to continue to grow. You're talking about the traffic and the concerns you're getting. We've got to be able to embrace the technology to be able to do that. Otherwise, it means more bodies. So we have asked for some time that we understand that it's the city has to ask for an increase in cameras, because if we could do that, the change in behavior would be dramatic if we could do it broadly.
But if the city was to ask that and we get the support from the police services, that would even be better, right? Okay, can I just ask one more question?
Very quick, we're already over 7 minutes.
So if I was to ask for a briefing note on the breakdown of, by division, I'm interested in the average number of officers on patrol at any given time, broken down by police division for the past 5 years, including the projected numbers for 2018. Would you be able to give me that briefing note? Individual divisions, the breakdown?
Yes, we will, although we're moving towards districts, and so that wouldn't be a fair representation of the direction that we're going in.
Well, if you can give me the
Thanks, Councillor.
divisions.
We got to move on. Councillor Burnside.
Thank you. Just to follow up on the, I got a lot of questions, but to follow up on the, basically the like stop sign cameras and turn cameras, recognizing that the city has to make the request, has any effort been made by either the service to the board or otherwise to ask the city to make that request? Because it's kind of like, look over there.
The short answer is yes. Yes, we have. It is not a, and I want to be very clear on this. I don't think that there is this resistance or pushback. I just think that we don't necessarily understand the timelines. It's something that we would like to happen sooner than later. And we understand the city is busy, but from our perspective, we think that that is something that's critical. I've had discussions with you on this in the past, sir, and I know that you're supportive of it because you see the value in it. But we're willing to work with anybody to make this happen sooner than later.
Okay.
If I can just add to that, Councillor Burnside, that we, former Chief Blair asked for that as well. Again, I come back to the essential point that the costs are going to continue. The pressures on policing as the city grows is going to continue. We're talking about the improvement of body cameras and all of those things. The one way you can hold the line on these things is by leveraging the technology, as you pointed out, and doing it broadly. So the sooner we start to do it, the bigger the impact.
I think there are about 180 to 200,000 stop signs in the city. Right, and I think you have 2 officers per division doing traffic. I don't know, was that 34? I mean, you can see where that goes. I just haven't, I know there was the push for what used to be called photo radar. I just haven't seen the push beyond that. But anyway, that was my one question. How much is presumptive illness costing the service? Okay, I'll leave that with you.
So about 900,000 for that, and we think a good portion of it is as a result of Bill 163.
Right, so about $1 million. Okay. Okay. In terms of the murders thus far this year, how many are gang related or suspected gang related?
That's can't be definitive, but I can say definitely the majority. It's very easy to say that.
So over 50%?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Sick time. There's been in the last 2 years, there's been a 25% increase in sick time amongst both uniform and civilian personnel. Can you attribute to that? What can you attribute that to, if anything, and what has been done about it, if anything?
I think any time an organization goes through changes, this is not tinkering change, this is massive change. You're going to have a huge, it creates stress and anxiety. So I think that may be one factor. The moratorium in terms of not filling positions could be another factor. And certainly it's a priority for us to actually try to get to what the root cause is so that we could take the necessary action. Our absenteeism was actually very good until 15, and then it kind of
15 was even fine compared to the rest of the
definitely we're definitely aware of it, and definitely working with HR to try to come up with a system.
I guess the good news is you're doing a lot better than the fire department.
Well, but it is concerning to us. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things. But okay, parking enforcement. I know Councillor Mihevc asked about that. I presume you do a cost-benefit analysis of off-duty court and sending an officer on duty. Yes?
Certainly, I'm sure that they do look at the cost of either option.
Would you be able to say yes or no if it's actually cheaper to send a parking control officer off duty, as when you compare the revenue when they're on duty? Because there's a 3-hour period that they're not writing tickets, correct? Okay, I'll keep moving.
We need to look at it's not just the cost of the officer, it's the revenue impact as well.
Right, that's what I was asking for.
So
Right.
we're going to get
Okay,
the answer.
I'll come back to that. Are contracts, whether it's senior officers or otherwise, is that public knowledge? Can I ask questions about that? Yeah, okay. Talk about the senior officers. Is their contract, does it come up at the same time as uniform?
The senior officers organization is a separate entity, and so it generally follows the association. So I think it followed last time by about 6 months.
Okay.
But the chief and the deputy's contracts are individual. They're out of that. And
Outside of that,
not
okay.
public.
I'm not talking about the chief.
Right. Okay.
He's a good guy. We can let that one go. But were their increases the same as uniform or the rest of the service in terms of cost of living?
Yeah.
Yes?
Was.
Okay. The senior officers, they have a car provided, correct? Like superintendents?
That's correct.
Okay. And if that superintendent happens to, and all the expenses are covered, obviously, if that superintendent happens to live in Barrie, are we paying for that superintendent to get back and forth to work?
When you say paying them, the senior officers are on salary?
No, sorry, I don't mean paying for their time, for their car. So we provide a car, or you provide a car that they use whenever. Would their use of that car could be to and from work? So essentially, we're paying gas, wear and tear, everything for them to live in Barrie and work in Toronto, if they live in Barrie.
Yes.
That's correct. Okay, thought so. Last question. As part of the contract, in lieu of overtime, they get 3 weeks extra vacation?
Those are senior officers' days.
Right. So potentially, if they've been around for a while, they're getting 10 weeks of holidays a year?
Well, it's not deemed as holidays. They're not getting paid for the time that they put in on a regular basis. The commanders have town hall meetings or going to different functions on a regular basis. So if they start at 7 o'clock and end at 10 o'clock, which most of them do, that's not included in the overtime package. So over the course of the year, the compensation is those senior officer days.
The three weeks?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor.
Thanks.
7 minutes. Councillor Davis.
I notice you, welcome back. I see you have the new district model in here as something you're doing this year. When will we see the new district model report?
The district model report, I can tell you, Councillor, what we're in the process of doing is come Q1, we're going to be doing a proof of concept with one of the districts. And with the districts, there are a host of different things. Sorry, I may not be answering the question.
It's the new boundaries for all of the districts.
Yeah, and so I can't answer that question on when we're going to see all of them, because what we have to do is we have to work off the very first one that we're doing come Q1, and then that one, as we go through it, will allow us the opportunity to look at when we're going to expand, how we're going to expand, and what that's going to look like.
This is the 54-55 division merger is going to be the model, and then you're going to look at everything else?
The actual 54 and 55 have done the amalgamation piece, but when it comes to the true district model, there are other elements that we're looking at. We're looking at putting in wagons. We're looking at modifying it's called the CISU. That's looking at the calls that the front line shouldn't be going to, and there are a host of
Okay, you're talking about the
minutia.
services.
Yes.
I'm talking about the boundaries of the districts. When will we see the boundaries of the districts?
Oh, you haven't seen those yet? Because we just went through. They just got approved by the command a couple of days ago.
Could you please send the new boundaries to us? Because we went out for a public consultation on 54 and 55 without the boundaries. And I don't know how we're going to fix that now, but that's something that we can take offline. And it was a surprise. I want to talk about marijuana enforcement. I presume we have an ask for the provincial and federal government. Do we have an ask? We haven't talked about it yet, I don't think. So, in terms of additional funding for marijuana enforcement, legalization of marijuana July 1st.
There are a couple of things. One of the things that I'm advised is that the province is putting together a task force, amalgamated services and jurisdictions that are working in conjunction with the municipal services in order to create the enforcement piece. My ask is for funding for the training for officers for the driver recognition for people that are impaired. I think that it's a costly process to train officers, and so I want to make sure that that is definitely one of the pieces in which we would like funding.
So are we likely to see, or the board going to see some kind of report on this at some point? Because I know that a lot of us are interested. It could be a very costly exercise.
Yeah, that includes me too. I'm very interested in how this is going to play out and exactly where the funds are going to be going. A lot of things have been said from both levels of government,
Yes.
but I have yet to see the deliverables for it.
Are the municipalities at the table with them at this point?
We have been there to make recommendations, and there are some questions that have been posed, and we're awaiting the final outcomes. But the law enforcement was involved, has been approached and advised and updated.
I would ask more about traffic and parking and how it fits into Vision Zero, but strategy, I'm not exactly sure, but I know all of us are interested in understanding how do we get better parking enforcement and traffic enforcement and how it connects with the Vision Zero strategy for the city. Is there somewhere we can go look for that? Or are they connected at all? Are you part of the Vision Zero implementation?
We are part of the Vision Zero. We have been included in a lot of the data analysis so that the city could have an understanding of where the pressure points were across the city. From an organizational perspective, I have amalgamated traffic and parking under one command, which wasn't before, so I understand that alignment is important. And also the alignment of working with the city is critical if we're all going to get it right. And you know, so far this year, our numbers have been reduced with our fatalities. Not going to say it's as a result of, but I certainly want to look to see if there is a pattern and a trend with the working together that is assisting in that cause.
Yeah, because often we just hear the only solution is better enforcement when we're working with communities and from the transportation side of things. The other thing I wondered about was you've got another collective agreement coming up. When does this collective agreement end? 2018?
2018.
Okay. And so we now have a fire settlement, and I wondered if you've had a look at the fire settlement and if you're to be compared to fire, what kind of, are any of those costs projected in this budget? 2019 and 20?
Not yet. I have not had a look at that. We'll start the process sometime this spring, but I have not seen the fire, nor have I talked. As you know, there's a position that the Big 12 police agencies are trying to make sure that they bargain in sync with each other. And
okay. All right. So you're trying to do some provincial bargaining.
Council, we have just assumed the rate of inflation for 19 and 20, so it's in our...
Okay. Okay. The other thing that's what I wondered about is if you could clarify, what are we getting from the provincial and federal money, federal governments now in terms of funding? Can I find it on analyst notes somewhere? What's the total amount?
I think it's 40...
And is it for specific things?
About $43 million, the bulk of that being the court provincial upload.
Okay.
Thanks, Council. We're at 7 minutes.
Thank you.
Councillor Carroll.
Yes, just the one thing that I forgot earlier, so I thank you, Mr. Chair, for the indulgence. Forgot to ask earlier, to follow up on a question that we asked this morning of 311 services. With respect to the transfer of some of the non-emergency calls that we're trying to pull out of 911 and over to 311, their assurances this morning were based on the timely and unconstrained sharing of data. That's apparently what we need to make sure that we're getting the numbers right and we're able to keep up the standard that people expected from 911 when they called there. And these are non-emergency, the parking calls, the ones that Transformational Task Force wants to move. But they're really still waiting on a data exchange. Is it clear to police staff working on this that if they want quick response from the city to take on the services, that data issues have to be sorted out and flagged for you the minute they arise?
Yes, my understanding, there is a relationship with the strategic management and with the city. I can't talk on what the scope is, but my understanding is that there was alignment from the start of this year. So I was assuming that under that relationship, part of the issue was, as we're handing or willing to work with the city, that the data through Environics and through the other tools were also a part of the conversation with the city. So I'm surprised if the response is that the holdback is data. I can certainly look into that and find out exactly what it is, and whatever it is to make that happen, I will make happen.
It probably is a good idea, because it may not be known to the officers responding to the requests that at the Municipal Licensing and Standards Division, in terms of the people that they'd be transferring it to, Municipal Licensing and Standards and 911, that they themselves went through the whole issue around protecting data. If you have to have an open data portal and a dashboard to show us what's going on, that privacy is paramount. And so the hand-to-hand of data here would be being handed to people who are very mindful of the same sets of privacy concerns. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you know, Councillor, sitting on the board, one of the things that we have been very effective with and continue to learn more ways is the sharing of data. So we have increasingly provided data not just from a community safety portal, but also from a community service portal, and that is something that's ongoing. So the data sharing is something that was once something we were reluctant to do, but I think you've seen through our behavior over the past while that has shifted dramatically.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Thank you. I think we've done all of our questions. I appreciate the time that you. Are there any, Council, any questions? You didn't really touch on parking, but I mean, that's also before us. So were there any questions specific? Yes. No, okay. Councillor Davison.
Frustrating is the amount of parking tags that are the areas that are not being enforced. All the non-permit parking areas, simply you do not enforce overnight parking. Wouldn't there be a lot of money to be made if somebody just started enforcing in a proactive way other than by complaint? I mean, every street has this pact, don't phone, no complaints, and then we won't get tickets. And so they park overnight.
I got tagged a month ago, so
They're enforcing Cabbagetown.
yeah, there are places.
Did you say Cabbagetown? That's because there's permit parking down there. Everybody's guests get ticketed if there's permit parking. Flipping over sides, you get ticketed in 15 minutes. But in half of my ward, there is no permit parking, and they park on the street all the time, overnight. No consequences. Once in a while, they get a ticket. Have you looked at more proactive enforcement of parking in non-permit parking areas? I would really like to understand what you're doing in the non-permit parking areas at some point.
So right now, let's make for choice. So right now, the 3-hour enforcement is only enforced when somebody on the street complains.
Right, I know that. It's just not fair. So as long as nobody complains, they park overnight, they don't pay, and they get no tickets.
The flip side will be if we start enforcing without any complaints, the complaints from the residents will go up, like why POs are there every day. Enforcing on our street, there's no issue, everybody's parked properly. So that's why the unit have adopted this policy, that 3-hour will be enforced when somebody on the street complains. That's the current policy of the unit.
I understand that. I'm asking if you've looked at whether or not, even pilot it. Take a neighborhood you just know by anecdotal experience has a lot of overnight parking and see what you could generate.
Definitely look into that, yeah.
Councillor,
Don't attribute that to me.
you can correct me if I'm wrong, excuse me for a sec, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if that's a police, that may be a city policy. You followed the policy on parking yourself, so wouldn't that be a policy decision that the city would determine instead of something that you would decide on with regard to parking? I don't know whether or not that's a police enforcement or police board issue as opposed to a city, us determining the policies on parking, permit parking.
No, I'm talking about violating the 3-hour bylaw.
It's the same, okay.
Yeah, but
Anyway,
my other question has to do with APS. We've had an experience so far with APS, and I just wanted, if you could share with us what the experience has been on the revenue side. 1 quarter. Casey Brendan.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The issuance to date in terms of parking ticket revenues, at Q3, we were projecting we were about 96% of budgeted, so we expect to be close for this year in terms of revenues actual versus budgeted. For 2018, we're projecting slightly lower issuance at 2.15 million tickets, which is a slight decrease over 2017. And our revenue figures are projected for tickets issued. The total revenue for the program is 107.7 million.
Why are you projecting lower issuance?
We're basing that on information that we've had from Toronto Police Service and their enforcement unit, and also in the level of compliance that we are seeing, that is seeing fewer tickets issued because people are, the compliance rate is actually up. People are actually able to pay by cell phone when they have parking tickets. That has contributed to fewer tickets being issued, and the higher fines for rush hour offenses are still in effect.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Burnside.
Sorry, just to follow up on that, the parking, that 3-hour parking, this is actually through you to the chief. Chief, you would remember, this situation occurred in the 1990s, probably around 92. Prior to that time, the 3-hour bylaw was enforced like every other municipality in terms of just the police going out and enforcing it. There was a big commotion in the press, and I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the political decision was made to only enforce on a complaint basis going forward from that point.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you very much for your presentation and the questions. Okay, councillors, we are now finished all of the presentations from all the agencies and divisions. And we've compiled, and I think the clerk has them almost ready, the briefing note requests that we have received over the last 4 days. Councilor Mahavik, the one that I'd mentioned to you has been removed, that you can actually find that information. Josie will get to you about that, but I think that we have done all the other ones. There's nothing, all of them seem to be fine. So if we can just give us a second here. And what we'll do is I will move just one motion with all of the briefing note requests that we've received in from everybody.
Mr. Chair, just while we're waiting, are we waiting?
Yeah, we're just waiting for clerks.
Between you and Josie. So basically, these briefing notes come back. Next step is we go to the public, we hear from them.
Yeah.
Then we have a series of meetings. Every department comes back, and we may move a motion or two as we feel appropriate related to that particular department.
Yeah, so the next step, we will have the public deputations in January, and then when we get into our wrap-ups, that's where by then all of these briefing notes will have come in. There are, I think, there's two wrap-up sessions. So after the first wrap-up session, if there's any other questions, any other potential briefing notes, generally there aren't. I don't think we've seen any in the past, or very few. You'll have an opportunity to, again, have one more, questions if there's any sort of anything you need, and then we'll do a final wrap-up where motions actually will be put forward for making decisions.
Okay, great. So I'll just ask which one is already that I put forward is now not on, and what is it dealing with? I'm not sure.
Yours, the Parks and Forestry.
What was that one?
So the one that you were asking, what outstanding items?
I had asked for a briefing note, and I was told that it's already somewhere.
Yes, it's already in the analyst notes.
I'm looking for it. Okay. So which one would it be, just so I know that I have to go hunt for it?
It's in Parks, Forestry, and Recreation. It's in the operating notes. The list of requests that have been submitted but not include all the outstanding items to implement the recreation service
The rec
plan.
stuff, okay.
Okay.
Great, but aren't oh, yes, there's an outstanding request through council where they're going to supply us some numbers.
And they're actually, I think, identified in the notes as well, so we can show that to you.
We just have to go to them.
Well, you just gave us, is that what we've all asked?
Yeah, so what is before you is all of the requests that you have brought to the clerk. So your requests, Councillor, have come to the clerk.
Okay.
We have reviewed all of them, so if you have given your request to the clerk,
Yeah, I have.
and other than the one from Councillor Mahavik that was already in the notes, they're all in this motion. Anyway, are we okay with this, then, if we want to put the motion up? Councillor?
I know I don't have a right to do this, but this first one was mine, and I wanted to look at part-time, temporary, and full-time. Comma, temporary. I gave it to you. Unless this, yeah? Yes.
Permanent versus temporary, full-time, part-time? Is that what you're asking?
Is it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just so we're clear, because there are different statuses, so you can have permanent and full-time and permanent part-time?
Yes.
You can have
Temporary, part-time,
full-time?
probably, and temporary, full-time.
Okay,
Which you have in your
Right.
PARs now.
right, we can get that.
Yes, we will get that. Okay.
So it needs to be added in there, temporary under part-time, or after part-time?
Did you get that?
Which one is she referring to?
On the first one.
The first one?
Just give us a sec here, we'll make the correction, Councillor.
It's temporary and permanent,
Give us one sec here.
Temporary and permanent, part-time and full-time.
And then take that there together. By division.
Okay, well, let me just throw that up just so we can.
Yep.
Yeah, I want to get the little correction for that. There we go, Councillor, it's now up, what you wanted, just to make sure. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Have a happy New Year, and we'll see everybody in the new year. Yeah, thank everybody.
Thank you.
Next is the public deputations in January. Need a motion to defer the item till January 8th. Councilors move that. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. There we are. Okay, we're done. We're adjourned.